Looking at the images of flooded neighborhoods in and around Houston throughout this week brings us face to face with just how much damage 9 trillion gallons of water, 4 miles square and 2 miles high, can do when it falls over a city over several days. Too much rain is not a good thing, as the people who lost loved ones and property to Hurricane Harvey's deluge can attest. Too much rain leads to rivers and creeks overflowing and waters continuing to rise even after they've come over the river's banks. Too much rain leads to houses being inundated and destroyed, and people being swept away and sometimes drowned in currents. The ancient Hebrews, like other primitive cultures, knew about the danger of too much water. So they told stories about Noah and the ark, and they sang psalms about God reigning enthroned over the flood and God's voice thundering over the waters. And later they were comforted by the words of Isaiah centuries after God had led them through the sea in escaping Egypt. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. Reverend Steve Garnis Holmes, a Methodist pastor colleague of mine, wrote a wonderful poem this week in the aftermath of the flooding in Houston and elsewhere in Texas. He prefaces his poem by quoting that bit of Isaiah 43. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. For I am the Holy One, your God, and I love you. And then he writes, in the flood that is this life, some waters will sweep your home away, and others stop at your doorstep. There is no choosing, no deserving in their rising or receding. On any given day, one of us is picnicking, another swimming for our lives. For all of us, someday the waters will rise, and with them, beside us in the water, a reaching out. Above the swirling flood, a reaching out. So many reaching out. That is what we have to stand on. That is what we and our fellow children of God in Houston and the Gulf Coast and in South Asia and in Nigeria have to stand on. Above the swirling flood, there is a reaching out. So many reaching out. What I love about the poem is that it emphasizes that the waters will rise for all of us someday, if not literally, then metaphorically. All of us will face a time, we face times when life's circumstances feel like a flood that threaten to overwhelm us. You know how that is. Someone you love dearly dies. You face financial crisis. You face down addiction or depression. There are all kinds of floods that can threaten to overwhelm us. We may be picnicking now, but one day, sure enough, we will all of us be swimming for our lives, and we'll need somebody to reach out to us. The problem in today's passage about Elijah and the widow of Zarephath is not too much rain, of course. It is not enough rain. Not enough water can be just as disastrous as too much water. You can ask the people of Sudan about that. By the time Elijah and the widow meet each other, it has not rained for a very long time. The land of Israel and its surrounding areas were in the middle of a drought. And when such ecological crises occur, it is often the poorest people who are most vulnerable to their effects. They live hand to mouth, and the little bit that they can manage to store away can dry up quickly. Such might have been the case with the widow of Zarephath. So when Elijah shows up at her house, at her doorstep, she's about to run out of food completely. She's getting ready to take the last little bit of flour and the last measure of oil she has left to make a little bread for herself and her son before they both die. Whatever resources she had are about to run out, and she is ready to give up. Then this prophet, this man of God, shows up and sees her gathering sticks and says, "Bring me some water and some bread." And I think the first miracle in this story is that she doesn't sock him right in the mouth. responds, "I don't have anything baked. Just a little flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug that I'm getting ready to cook up for a last meal for my boy and myself." But Elijah tells her to fear not. Amazing how often "be not afraid" pops up in the Bible, right? Somebody said it appears 365 times. I don't know about that. I haven't really done the research on it, but I like to think that's true. Maybe even one more for leap years. Elijah tells her to fear not, but to go ahead and use up the last of what she has for a meal and bring him something to eat first, and then she can eat afterward. She does as Elijah says, and from that point on until it finally rains in Israel, the flour in her jar and the oil in her jug doesn't run out. It's quite a miracle story. It's amazing what can happen in the midst of crisis and hardship when people take what little they feel like they possess in terms of material or emotional or spiritual resources and give it over to the work of love and welcome. One of the things that makes the story of the widow of Zarephath remarkable, and this is why, by the way, Jesus refers to it in his first sermon in Nazareth, a sermon that gets him thrown out of town, by the way. One of the remarkable things about the story of the widow of Zarephath is that the woman who takes care of Elijah is not an Israelite. She's from the land of Sidon. She's a Gentile. She worships a different God than the Israelites, if she worships at all. And at the point where the widow is ready to give up and die, she takes all that she has left and she uses it to care for an outsider as well as herself. She puts what she has in the service of a God of love, and she finds that what she has does not run out. It keeps getting replenished somehow. I've been marveling at the stories that have come out of Houston this week. I know you've read or watched some of them. In the middle of such epic devastation and loss, we've heard and seen wonderful things. Lives have been lost, yes. Property has been destroyed, yes. But the story of the jar of meal and the jug of oil keeps playing out in front of us. People from various religious traditions or none at all, people from different social classes, people with different political perspectives, all coming together to provide help to their neighbors in need. One of my favorite stories happened in a storm shelter in Rockport, Texas. When the emergency authorities pulled into that shelter last Saturday, they asked, "Who is in charge here?" And everybody pointed to Zachary Deering, a 29-year-old man wearing shorts and an olive green t-shirt with curly blonde hair pulled up into a man bun. He didn't look the part, but he seemed to have keen command of a desperate situation playing out in his beach community of about 10,000 people, a tiny town which took a catastrophic hit from Hurricane Harvey. It was right in the center of the path that Hurricane Harvey took into the Texas coast. The emergency personnel asked Deering what was going on, and he rattled off basic facts and need. The shelter had 126 people at the last head count. 6 were medically fragile, 4 needed oxygen, 2 needed hospice care. Everyone was calm because they'd just been fed, he said. And Katie Contrera of the Texas Emergency Medical Task Force asked him, "What service are you with?" She was shocked to learn that Zachary Deering, a descendant of the widow of Zarephath, was a civilian with no medical expertise. He just moved to Rockport from Lexington, Kentucky, only 3 months before to live with his father, a cancer survivor, on a houseboat. What did he do for a living? He was a screenwriter. Though they had set up a shelter in Rockport, officials had provided no supplies, no management for vulnerable citizens unwilling or unable to evacuate. So somebody had to step in, and it was Zachary Deering. Did you get that? They had no resources, none, no supplies, no leadership, only a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil, and a man named Zachary Deering. He stepped in, he recruited volunteers, mostly between the ages of 16 and 21, and put them on ships, checking everybody inside. He got people to pool their food and water so that they could all be fed. He had the team plug up leaks from the driving rain, and he organized trips into the windstorm to rescue more stranded people. The article I read about Deering says, "This episode underscores how natural disasters can often overwhelm official efforts to plan and staff for the worst. In this case, a small South Texas city getting smacked with its worst storm in 47 years. Deering's unlikely role at the shelter also highlights how unlikely volunteers can band together in the face of danger and provide one another aid and comfort and life-saving care. Deering became a one-man army running a triage hospital with nothing. Just a little bit of oil and a little bit of flour. Just one guy, giving what little he had in the midst of a natural disaster and chaos, and somehow it was enough. And finally, late that Saturday evening, after he'd run the shelter for days and told the emergency personnel what they needed, buses arrived to carry people to Austin. And watching those buses load on Saturday evening, he was elated that everyone at the shelter was finally getting what they needed. He broke into tears when it became clear that a collection of state law enforcement and emergency professionals had the solutions for the many problems that he had been juggling. No one got hurt, he said. The patients are alive. These guys answered my prayers. And I cried. I don't know what kind of religious tradition Zachary Deering comes from, and it doesn't matter. What matters is that, like the widow of Zarephath, Zachary took what he had and put it in the service of a compassionate God, and it was enough until help arrived. Then there's the story of the Mexican bakers. Did you catch their story? They were trapped in their bakery for 2 days in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. Their bakery, El Bolillo Bakery in Houston. They were trapped in there, but they had nearly 2,000 kilograms of flour to bake bread and pan dulce throughout the night. And the day after, when they were stranded by floods over the weekend, they'd been working on a late shift when they realized that they couldn't leave the shop because of the level of water on their streets. And to take their minds off worrying about their family and friends, they decided to continue to bake for those affected by the devastating downpours. And there's a wonderful picture of those Mexican bakers delivering bread to the mattress king. Did you hear his story? All those mattresses, and people needed a place to sleep. And the Mexican bakers, and the mattress king, and the widow of Zarephath, don't they teach us something? I think of the image that I saw of the African American pastor on top of an SUV looking in to see if there was a person inside that vehicle that was submerged, and he wouldn't go anywhere until he checked every single car. So many stories of people finding that when their resources were dwindling, somehow they had enough energy, enough hope to care for others. And then there were the ones who died in the process of helping, and sometimes that happens too, right? Sometimes people die. We know this. And they don't have the benefit that the widow of Zarephath had of Elijah showing up and raising their child from the dead. But they do, I hope, have the assurance that even death won't get the last word. So, we've been working, let me put it another way, Katie and Dana Pratt have been working really hard with their team to get ready for us hosting 40 people who are inadequately housed in the week before Christmas. It's a big project. We're taking it on. And sometimes it feels like it's too much, even for a very wealthy congregation like ours. It feels like it might be too much. It's going to require a lot of volunteers. And the fire marshals came, and Katie and Mary Ann met with them, and it turns out there's a few things that we have to do to get ready. And it was a little stressful. There was a whole team of the fire marshals. It's all going to work out. Katie and Mary Ann needed to talk to me for a little while. Just a little stressed. It's going to be okay, because we know the story, right, of the widow of Zarephath. Katie was talking to some people from Facets about, what the guests will need. And they said what the guests really need is socks. It's what they need more than anything else. They need their feet to be protected. So Katie said, let me get on that, let me think about that. She called an organization called the Joy of Socks. And what this organization does is it provides socks for people who need socks for their feet. And they said that they would send us to give to our guests 140 pairs of women's socks and 120 pairs of men's socks, all that they can fit in a giant box. They're sending those socks to us for free, because this congregation wants to be sock angels. Again and again and again, we get reminded of how when we take the little that we have, the flour, the oil, the energy, the talent, material resources, when we take the little that we have and we give it to God in the service of love, it doesn't run out. There's enough. In Jesus' name.